Hey, Ben. Thank you so much for being here. I'm a huge fan of yours and everyone at the Daily Wire, and I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to get destroyed. So, so my question has to do with gun control. I think that's on everyone's mind here, and I mean, obviously after the Tree of Life shooting, and then the shooting that just happened in your neck of the woods in California. I've been talking with a lot of friends, and we just don't know what to do and like what the answer is. I'm on the conservative side. I know that the importance of the Second Amendment and how obviously we can't get rid of that or amend that at all. And a lot of the places like California and Chicago and all these places where the gun laws are so strict already that it's not going to get stopped. And a lot of the solutions that the left offers aren't going to solve the problem. And it's just we're just shouting at each other and everyone's not giving the best answers, I don't think. So I just want to ask you what your solutions would be. If there was like a President Ben Shapiro, how would you solve the problem?
Could you stand on the X? Yeah, so the camera can see.
Guys, it's just a coincidence that I visited Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania in the last 3 years. So, number one, I think that the big mistake that folks make about the government is they think that government can solve all of our problems. The fact is the government is not capable of solving all of our problems. It can't protect us from every bad thing that's going to happen in our lives. And when we think that the government can, it sometimes leads us to curtail rights in ways that we don't actually want and that are ineffective. California, as you mentioned, is the most gun-controlled state in the nation. The Brady Center says that it has the toughest gun laws in the nation. And the latest mass shooting obviously happened in California at that bar. That was in Thousand Oaks. So there are certain things that I think the government can do, and then there are certain things I think that we have to do as a society. Certain things I think the government can do. I'm in favor of what they call gun violence restraining orders. What these are laws that basically say that if you are a family member or a close friend of somebody, then you can appeal to a court to, with due process, remove somebody's capacity to have access to firearms for a specified period of time, and then you have to have that renewed every so often. So you have a situation like the Thousand Oaks shooter who had a violent altercation with his mother, and his mother goes to court and says, okay, I want an application, I want a judge to remove his capacity to have access to a firearm. It already existed in California, his mom just didn't take advantage of it. So number one, we actually have to enforce the laws that are on the books, but that seems like a rational piece of legislation that would be good because we don't actually want mentally ill people running around with, dangerous mentally ill people, I should say, running around with firearms. I think that we should be hardening targets at obvious locations. So synagogues, again, I was actually quite surprised that there wasn't any security at Tree of Life just because where I live, there is security at every synagogue, and there's been top security at every synagogue for legitimately over a decade. And would that have solved everything? I don't know, but it would have been better. I mean, security is always better than no security, and when I choose my child's school, one of the key issues that we ask about is how secure the facility is. That could mean anything from armed guards to double doors to capacity for lockdown. Right? We're going to have to treat this as, depending on how seriously we all want to treat safety, we're going to have additional costs. But the real widespread problems that lead to higher levels of crime have very little to do with access to arms, because the correlation between murders and murder rate in the United States and gun laws is non-existent. Eugene Volokh had a post at the Washington Post about this maybe a couple of years ago. Basically, there are certain things that as a society we're going to need to do to ensure that people are less violent. The number one thing is we need more fathers in the home. We need men staying at home with their kids and raising their children properly. In a huge majority, I mean, almost virtually unanimous of these mass shootings. The mass shooter was somebody who did not live with a biological father at home for most of their childhood. That's a serious problem, and that links into broader issues about crime and how we quash crime. It's also necessary to note that school shootings, for example, have been on a downward trend since the mid-90s. So a lot of this has to do with additional media attention. We in the media can do a lot of good work by not mentioning the names of shooters. You see that a lot of the networks will mention the names of shooters. There's good social science to suggest that's a terrible idea, that shooters are looking for publicity, and this is we at Daily Wire don't do it. We stopped doing it back in February after Parkland. I would urge other media outlets to do the same. Obviously, we weren't the first to do it. We should have done it earlier. The same thing is true when it comes to general coverage of mass shootings. Blanket coverage of mass shootings is actually what mass shooters want. There's a case to be made that while we ought to cover mass shootings, we ought to cover it with less open blanket coverage and hysteria simply because you are actually incentivizing people to get publicity by doing this sort of thing. In the past, Malcolm Gladwell basically says there's been a tipping point at which people who are not completely mentally ill have decided that it's worthwhile to go do this sort of stuff for publicity. And the only way to cut back on that is by us to voluntarily, as a society, start cutting back on the amount of publicity we give to shooters.
Thank you.